I knew something was off the second I pulled into my driveway and saw tire tracks leading around the side of my house. The gravel path that curved toward the lake in my backyard wasn't supposed to be used by anyone but me, but clearly, someone had ignored that. Name's Lucas Langford. I'm a mechanic, not a lawyer, but I know when someone's messing with my property. I bought this lakeside fixer-upper 6 years ago, and every nail I hammered into it was with the plan of growing old here. Peaceful, quiet, and mine, at least until the HOA got involved. I stepped out of my truck and followed the tracks, and that's when I saw it, a dock. A brand new, shiny wooden dock stretching out over the lake built right on my land. I stopped dead. What the hell? It wasn't there 2 days ago. There were still sawdust piles and a red Solo cup half buried in the grass. I walked the length of it, snapping pictures with my phone. And then I saw the kicker. Nailed to the side of the dock was a plaque that read, "Property of Lakeside Shores, HOA private use only." I stormed back up to the house, already dialing the HOA number. Of course, Rebecca Anderson picked up, board president. Typical Karen haircut, voice like a blender full of gravel, and a self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. "Rebecca," I said, trying not to yell. "Why the hell is there a dock on my land?" "Oh, Lucas," she said, like I was a child, "it's for the community. We voted on it last week at the special meeting. You didn't attend, because I wasn't told about it. Well, notices were posted at the clubhouse. I don't live at the clubhouse. I live here. On the land you just built on without asking." Her tone shifted. "The HOA has full authority over common use spaces. It's not common use. I've got the property map in my drawer and the deed in my safe. That land is mine. You're being difficult. We'll talk about this at the next meeting." Click. So that's how she wanted to play it. Fine. That night I printed a big red and white sign, "Private property, no trespassing." I posted it right at the start of the dock, then chained and padlocked the entrance. Next morning I added a trail cam pointed right at it. Didn't take long. That afternoon I caught Rebecca and 2 of her minions, Eileen and Sandy, standing at the dock, arms crossed, staring at the sign like it was an insult to their legacy. Rebecca yelled, "You can't block community property, Lucas." I stepped out onto the lawn. "It's not community property, it's my lot. You built this thing on it without permission, and now it's locked. You're making this harder than it has to be." "No," I said, "you already did that." She stormed off, heels stabbing into the grass. Later that evening, my neighbor Gary came by. "You know they used HOA funds to build that dock, right?" he said, shaking his head. "What?" "Yeah, charged a special budget allocation. They didn't tell anyone where it was going. So now they were building on private land and stealing community funds to do it." I wasn't just mad anymore. I was ready to burn their whole little empire to the ground. HOA story, HOA stories, homeowners association stories. The next morning, I drove into town and walked straight into the county recorder's office. I asked for the parcel map, the original plat, and any recent amendments filed for the Lakeside Shores area. The lady behind the counter raised an eyebrow when I told her what the HOA had done on my lot. She handed me a thick folder with a quiet, "Good luck." Back at home, I spread the documents across the dining table, comparing the lines and notations. My property line extended a solid 12 feet beyond where they'd built the dock. There was no easement, no variance, and definitely no community right-of-way. I snapped close-up pictures of the documents and uploaded them to a backup drive, then printed copies to keep in the truck. I needed to know how much of this stunt was just Rebecca's arrogance and how much was deliberate deception. So I went to the HOA's website, which was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Half the links were broken, and the meeting minutes hadn't been updated in over 4 months. I called Gary again. "You still have that folder from when you ran for the board?" I asked him. "You mean the one where they tried to disqualify me over a typo on my application?" "Yeah, I kept the whole mess." I met him that afternoon at his place. He handed me a binder thick with printouts, emails, newsletters, budget drafts, and internal memos. He'd highlighted anything fishy. "Look at this," he said, flipping to a page marked in orange. "This memo says they approved construction of a community water access structure but doesn't name the location. No address, no parcel number." "Who signed off?" I asked. "Rebecca, and 2 board members who don't even live near the lake." I stared at the signatures. "So they decided to build a dock, didn't say where, and just picked my land because it was closest." "Looks that way, and they build it under landscaping improvements." That was fraud, straight up. Not a gray area, not a misunderstanding. They'd spent community dues on a project deliberately mislabeled in the budget, then built it on private property without consent. I drove to the sheriff's office the next morning. Sheriff Dan knew me well enough he'd brought his truck into my shop last winter when his heater core blew. I explained everything, showed him the photos, the parcel maps, the memo. He thumbed through it silent, then he looked up. "You got the original land survey in my safe, want me to grab it?" "Yeah, bring it by this afternoon. And Lucas, don't move the dock yourself. If it turns into a legal matter, you don't want them accusing you of destroying evidence." I left with a copy of the incident report and a pit in my stomach. This wasn't just about a dock anymore. It was about power, Rebecca's need to control everything, even if it meant breaking the law. Back home, I pulled the original survey out of the safe and brought it to the station. Sheriff Dan took it, made copies, and told me he'd be contacting the building inspector from the county to verify there were no permits issued for that dock. There weren't. That Friday, the inspector showed up at my place in a dusty work truck, clipboard in hand. He walked the length of the dock, took measurements, muttered something under his breath, and then turned to me. This wasn't permitted. No application, no site plan, no environmental review. They built over the waterline without submitting a shoreline development request. "Can I tear it down?" "Not yet. It's evidence now." The next week, things escalated. A letter arrived from the HOA, not signed by Rebecca this time, but by a law firm they'd hired. It accused me of obstructing community access and violating cooperative use guidelines. They threatened a $500 daily fine until I removed the lock and allowed authorized members access to the dock. I laughed out loud. Then I sent the letter to my cousin, who's a real estate attorney in Denver. 2 days later, he called. "That letter's a bluff. Total nonsense. They're trying to scare you into giving up your rights. You've got the deed, the survey, the proof they built on your land. If they try to collect that fine, it's going to blow up in their face." I asked what my next move should be. File an injunction, temporary restraining order, bar them from accessing your lot until the court rules on ownership. You've already got the sheriff and building inspector involved. That's a huge advantage. He walked me through the paperwork. I filed it at the county courthouse the following Monday. The judge approved it the next day. Just like that, the HOA was legally banned from setting foot on my property, dock included, until the matter was resolved. I had the order laminated and posted at the end of my driveway. That night, someone threw a rock through my front window. I didn't hear it, I was in the garage, but I found it the next morning. The rock had a note rubber banded to it: "Stop fighting. You're ruining IT for everyone." I handed it over to the sheriff. He didn't look surprised. "You think it was Rebecca?" I asked. "She's careful," he said. "But someone on that board has been playing dirty for a long time." The next HOA meeting was open to residents. I showed up early, copies of my injunction and the parcel map in a folder under my arm. The room was packed more than I'd ever seen. Word had gotten around. People had questions, and Rebecca looked rattled. She tried to run the meeting like nothing was wrong, but the moment she opened the floor, I stood. I have formal documents showing that the dock was built on my land without permission, without permits, and using misallocated funds. I've filed an injunction. The sheriff and county inspector have both confirmed the violations. Rebecca's face tightened. "This isn't the time, it is. You used HOA money to build something illegally, then you lied about where that money went. That's fraud." Murmurs spread through the room. I continued. If anyone here wants to see the documents, I've brought copies. And if anyone's been paying fines or dues into this budget, you should know it's being used to violate property rights. An older woman in the front row raised her hand. Are you saying our dues are being used for private construction? They're being used to build on someone else's land without permission and under a falsified budget line. Another man stood. I want a forensic audit. Rebecca's voice cracked. This is not how we conduct business, it is now, someone else said. The board crumbled under pressure. Residents demanded a vote to suspend Rebecca and appoint an interim treasurer to review the books. She tried to stall, but too many people were angry. The vote passed. She and 2 others were suspended pending investigation. After the meeting, people came up to me thanking me. One guy offered to help pull up the dock once the legal dust settled. Another said he'd been fined for having an unapproved mailbox and wanted to reopen his case. That night, I sat on my back porch and watched the sun dip behind the lake. The dock was still there, silent and useless, chained off and surrounded by legal tape. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I owned my land again, and Rebecca. She was about to learn that when you build something crooked, it's only a matter of time before it collapses. I didn't expect the fallout to spread as fast as it did. 2 days after the meeting, the local news van rolled up to my driveway. A young reporter with a notepad and a cameraman in tow asked if I'd be willing to talk. I hesitated, but when she said they'd already interviewed 3 other residents and had reached out to the county inspector, I figured the story was already out there. Better that the truth came from me than from someone guessing at it. I walked her down to the lake, unlocked the chain, and let her see the dock up close. She took photos, asked about the survey and injunction, and I showed her the laminated order still zip-tied to the post. Her last question caught me off guard. Do you think this was just a mistake, or something more deliberate? I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted to the lake, still and glassy. Then I looked her square in the eye. I think they knew exactly what they were doing. And I think they thought no one would stop them. By the time the story aired that evening, it had already been picked up by 2 regional outlets. The reporter had done her homework. She'd pulled property records, permit logs, and even interviewed a former HOA board member who said he resigned last year because of rampant procedural violations. The next morning, I got a call from a woman named Natalie Chen. She introduced herself as an investigator with the county's Office of Special Compliance. She asked if I'd be willing to meet. I told her I'd be home all day. She showed up just after noon, dressed in a charcoal blazer and boots that looked like they'd seen plenty of field work. She carried a hard case and a legal pad, and she didn't waste time with small talk. I'm opening a formal investigation into potential misuse of HOA funds and unauthorized construction on regulated shoreline, she said. We're coordinating with the district attorney's office. I led her to the dining table and laid out the documents I'd gathered. She took her own notes, asked very specific questions, and requested copies of everything. Then she asked something no one else had. Have you noticed any attempts to conceal or alter documents since this started? I paused. I haven't, but I also haven't had access to anything beyond what I collected from Gary and what's public. She nodded once and made a note. We've already subpoenaed the HOA's financials. If anything disappears now, it's obstruction. I asked what kind of penalties we were talking about. Depends on what we find, she said. If it's just unauthorized spending, that's civil. If they forged permits or tampered with records, that's criminal. And if they used dues to pay contractors under the table, we're into tax evasion territory. She stayed for almost 2 hours. By the time she left, I had a signed statement confirming the investigation and a copy of the complaint number. That evening, Gary and I sat on his porch, flipping through the HOA's old newsletters. We weren't hunting for more wrongdoing, we were cataloging patterns. Every big expenditure from the last 3 years had Rebecca's fingerprints on it. A security wall that went over budget by 20 grand. An emergency sidewalk replacement that never actually happened. A community garden that was supposed to be installed on the east side of the neighborhood but mysteriously never materialized. Gary tapped the page. You think all of this ties together? I don't know, I said. But if someone digs hard enough, they'll find out. That dig came faster than I expected. 1 week later, a black SUV pulled up in front of the HOA office. 2 agents from the district attorney's task force stepped out and walked straight in. They came out 40 minutes later carrying boxes. The next day, a forensic accountant was assigned to the case. I only found out what they uncovered because Natalie called me directly. They created a secondary account, she said, unregistered. They funneled over $30,000 from dues into it and paid private contractors in cash. I leaned against the workbench in my garage. That's money laundering. It is. And the contractor who built the dock, he's already flipped. Said Rebecca told him the land was HOA owned and the paperwork was in progress. I asked if she'd be arrested. In time. We're building the case from the ground up. We want it airtight. It wasn't just about the dock anymore. It was embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. And the more they pulled, the worse it got. The board tried to go silent, but by then it was too late. Residents started demanding answers. At the next open meeting, Rebecca didn't even show. The interim treasurer, an accountant named Dolores who'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, read a prepared statement. As of this afternoon, the board has voted to dissolve the current leadership structure pending legal outcomes. A temporary oversight committee will manage operations until a full audit is complete. She didn't look happy about it. No one did. But it was necessary. That night, I got another visitor. This time it was Sheriff Dan. He stood on my porch with a manila envelope in hand and a tired look in his eyes. I thought you'd want to see this before it hits the wire, he said, handing me the file. Inside were arrest affidavits. Not just Rebecca. 2 other board members. Charges ranged from misappropriation of public funds to falsification of records and conspiracy to defraud. Dan rubbed the back of his neck. You did more than just stop them from building on your property. You brought down a whole racket. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and looked out at the lake. The next morning, I unlocked the chain on the dock and walked to the end of it. Not because I wanted to use it, but because I needed to decide what to do with it. A week later, I filed a petition with the county to have it removed. Not just taken down, but dismantled under supervision so it couldn't be repurposed. That was approved within 3 days. The contractor who installed it offered to do the removal for free as part of his cooperation deal. I said yes, as long as it was done before the next full moon. The day the dock came down, half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Not out of petness, but out of relief. It was the last visible piece of something rotten, and seeing it hauled away felt like a wound closing. Dolores approached me as the last plank was loaded onto the trailer. We're holding a special vote next month, she said. To rewrite the bylaws, make them clearer, add oversight, no more backroom votes. We're going to mail notices this time, every single one certified. I nodded. Let me know where to sign. She smiled faintly. You ever think about running for the board? I let out a breath. I think I've had enough politics for 1 year. She laughed softly and walked off. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the DA's office. The charges had been formalized. The trial would take several months, but the evidence was strong. The HOA's old bank account had been frozen, and a restitution fund was being set up for residents who'd paid fines based on fraudulent rules. I never wanted to be the guy who shook things up. I just wanted to live in peace. But sometimes peace needs a little force behind it. I replaced the broken window, reseeded the lawn where the dock had been, and planted a row of dogwoods along the edge of the lake. Not because I was afraid of someone building there again, but because I wanted a line even they couldn't pretend not to see. And this time, it wasn't just mine. It was proof. The first court date came on a warm morning in late June. The kind of day where the lake behind my house would normally be enough to keep me home. But instead, I was wearing a button-down and standing outside the county courthouse, watching as reporters clustered near the marble steps like vultures waiting on fresh roadkill. Inside, the courtroom was packed, not just with attorneys and investigators, but with dozens of my neighbors, some I knew by name, others who had only waved from across the street until this mess exploded. It wasn't just about the dock anymore, not for any of us. Rebecca sat at the defense table, flanked by two lawyers. One of them looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She kept her eyes down, her posture stiff, arms folded tight across her chest like she was holding herself together by sheer will. I didn't feel sorry for her. The prosecutor, a tall, gray-haired woman with a calm but surgical tone, laid out the charges in a voice that cut through the murmuring room. Misappropriation of funds, filing false financial documents, unauthorized construction on restricted shoreline, tampering with community records. And the most serious wire fraud and falsification of permits involving a licensed contractor. As she spoke, the weight of it settled in the room like a fog. The judge, a firm but even-keeled man in his 60s, didn't waste time. He denied the request for dismissal and set the trial schedule. No one clapped, no one cheered, but I caught Dolores nodding from her seat 3 rows behind me, her arms crossed not in defiance but relief. When I returned home that afternoon, my mailbox was overflowing. Flyers, letters, hand-signed notes from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were simple thank yous. Others told stories of fines they'd paid or repair approvals they'd been denied, all while Rebecca and her crew were funneling money into secret projects. One envelope contained a typewritten letter from a former board member who had moved away last year. He described a closed-door vote Rebecca had forced through, threatening to ostracize anyone who opposed her. He'd kept copies, real ones, of internal memos she'd sent, using HOA letterhead to authorize the dock project under a fake community beautification initiative. He'd held onto them out of guilt, unsure what to do. Now he wanted them to help clean house. I made copies and handed them off to the prosecutor's office the next morning. 2 weeks later, subpoenas began landing like thunderclaps. The HOA's former bookkeeper, a nervous man named Clay who always wore sweater vests even in summer, confessed during a deposition that he'd been instructed to round down certain expense categories and streamline contractor records. He'd been bribed with a tax rebate and a waived fine for a fence violation on his mother's property. Meanwhile, the county launched a full audit of the HOA's last 5 years. I wasn't directly involved in that, but I didn't need to be. I was still busy. With the dock finally gone, I had the property surveyed again, not for legal reasons, but for peace of mind. I planted native reeds along the shoreline to restore the water's edge and put up a low stone barrier, more symbolic than functional. It wasn't about keeping people out anymore. It was about drawing a line no one could pretend not to see. A month later, I got a call from the assistant DA. "She's taking a deal," he said, pleading guilty to 3 felony charges. She'll avoid jail by cooperating and paying restitution, but she's banned from serving on any board or managing community funds for 15 years. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I asked, "Does she have to pay back what she stole?" "Yes. And she'll be personally liable for any remaining amount after the HOA's insurance covers its portion. The civil suit from the residents is moving forward too. She's not walking away unscathed." The next neighborhood meeting felt different. For the first time, it wasn't held in the clubhouse. It was at the community park, under the open sky, folding chairs arranged in loose rows. People brought lemonade, kids played in the grass, and no one wore suits or name tags. Dolores stood up front with a clipboard and a tired but genuine smile. "We've rewritten the bylaws," she said. "Every policy has to be reviewed annually by a third party. All meetings will be recorded and archived online, and no project over $5,000 can move forward without 75% approval by vote." People clapped not out of obligation, but because they meant it. She looked over at me. "Lucas, would you come up?" I did, reluctantly. She handed me a small envelope. We collected donations from the neighborhood to help cover the costs you took on defending your property. It's not everything, but it's something. I opened it later that night, 14 checks and a few crisp bills, totaling just under $2,000. I didn't cash them. Instead, I used the funds to install 2 new benches down by the shoreline, looking out over the water. A few days after the benches were installed, I found a note left on one of them. No name, just a simple message written in careful block letters. Thank you for protecting what's ours too. I kept that note in my toolbox. Summer rolled into fall, and the neighborhood began to feel like a community again. Kids rode bikes down the street without getting cited for helmet violations. People painted their shutters whatever color they liked, and no one came around measuring grass blades with rulers. The HOA was still there, but now it served the people, not the other way around. One crisp morning in October, I walked down to the water with a thermos of coffee and sat on the bench facing the lake. The dogwoods had taken root, their leaves turning amber in the early light. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet I'd imagined when I first bought the place. I thought about how close things had come to being lost, how easy it would have been to back down, but I didn't, and neither did the people who stood up when it counted. As I sipped my coffee, I saw Gary walking his dog along the trail. He waved and I waved back, no words, no need. The lake was still and the land was mine. Not just because I said so, not because of a sign or a lock, but because I proved it. In court, in the community, and in the one place that mattered most, in the eyes of everyone who'd been watching, justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or parades. It came with clarity, with lines redrawn, with power returned to the people it belonged to. And for the first time in a long time, the water looked just right.